Welcome, everybody, to Broadcast Team Alpha. So happy to have you here with us. We bring you, and you bring us back, the Quantum Edge conversation while exploring who knows where we're going to go with our special, very respected and welcomed guest. So much to talk about. So much is happening in the world today. We're actually recording on January 31st, and it's just such a perfect time to have Father Tiso here with us. Before we get started, I want to thank you for supporting the channel. If you have not liked and subscribed, please do that. And, we have a mastermind group on Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. And some people liken it as a think tank. Some people liken it as a group where we intend and meditate. Some people liken it as a prayer group. We do a lot of intention and prayer for healing with a lot of visualization, and some beautiful things have happened to that. But the most beautiful thing is the connection that you make with yourself, right? And with your creator during that time. So if you'd like to join us, just send an email to themastermindconnection@gmail.com. Augie will send you the link. You can come hang out with us, see if you like it, and you're welcome to join us. I just want to send a shout out over to our friends at the Conscious Awakening Network. There is all kinds of growth and expansion going on there. I'm helping them with a project. So it's all beginning to unfold. So if you go over there now and start looking around, you will be on the cutting edge of what's going to happen over there. So without any further ado, I'm so excited to talk with Father Augie. So please tell us about Father Tiso.
Yes, this is going to be fun and phenomenal education, especially for me, because this is deeply into my interest. We have with us Father Francis Tiso. He is a Catholic priest. He lives in Italy, and he's a world traveler and has studied a lot more than the Christian religion. He is a priest of the Diocese of, I don't speak Italian, but I'm going to give it a shot. It's Isernia, Veranfo. No, Verafno. I got close. And that is in Italy. But he was born in Mount Vernon, New York, here. Yay. And there is a difference of culture. And he's been living in Italy for a long time, but he got a perfect American accent. And he has a doctorate in Buddhist studies at Columbia, and he also he got a master's of divinity from Harvard. Now that is some solid education. He studied many of the things totally outside of the box of the Catholic Church, and he was a liaison to the other religious doctrines by the Catholic Church. And he's written several books, which you can find at Amazon. And my favorite there is Liberation in One Lifetime. Isn't that what we all want to do, to get out of this place and not, yeah, there it is.
Beautiful.
Okay. Yeah, I've been talking too much, so welcome to the show, Father
Welcome,
Tiso.
Father.
It's good to be back. I think it's 3 or 4 years that we haven't spoken, and it's nice to be back with you, and really grateful for an opportunity to further some of the points that we raised before. and talk about not only the book, but maybe some of the implications of this research, for other aspects of the spiritual quest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that would be wonderful.
Yeah,
So one
how
of the
did
things
this
that,
start out?
yeah,
You mentioned something right before we started the recording. There was a reason for you to go down this path. Uh, what would that be?
well, of course, we could go way back because back in the early 70s, when I was an undergraduate, I got to know Brother David Steindl-Rast, who was a Benedictine monk from Austria who had come to the United States with his brothers around 1950. And they were hoping to build a new life for themselves in America. And Brother David eventually found his way to a monastery in upstate New York and became a Benedictine monk in America. At the present time, he's still alive. He's 99 years old, and
Wow.
he's living in Austria in a Benedictine monastery, I think near Salzburg, in Austria. And he continues to give conferences and lectures and prays for all of us, from his monastery. He's a remarkable person. Got the same age as my mom. Okay, so
Wow.
the spiritual father and my mom have the same age. My
Mhm.
dad is already 102, so
Oh man.
these folks are a great witness to history, living history. But
Yeah.
anyway, Brother David was very interested in Zen dialogue, all right, and we worked on that for quite a few years together. But he also was in dialogue with something called the Jesus Seminar. Have you ever have you ever crossed paths with that? This is a group of your classic scholars of the New Testament who were not related to a particular church or denomination, but who were secular scholars of the Bible. And one of the exercises that they would do would be to debate which of the sayings of Jesus is most likely to be historical. It's like, what does it sound like? Does it sound like it would come from a rabbi in the first century in northern Israel? Is it likely to have resonances with the Aramaic language? All of that. Because, many of the sayings of Jesus were retold orally. And so some of them evolved over the decades after his death and resurrection. So people incorporated the sayings of Jesus into the New Testament accounts, but many of those things were changed when they were translated into Greek and when they became part of a way of seeing the
Yeah.
faith in Jesus. Okay. So
Mhm.
anyway, Brother David was in dialogue with them, especially Marcus Borg, and Marcus Borg and some of the other scholars there were convinced that the resurrection of Jesus was a profound psychological, you might say, not just an experience, but a kind of an explosion of their hopes. In other words, they had lost hope seeing Jesus arrested and killed, but then something happened that turned the whole thing inside out. All right.
Mhm.
So a catastrophe became a tremendous explosion of hope, but always on a psychological or spiritual level and not on Jesus actually physically rising from the dead. And Brother David said, well, it's a good explanation up to a point, but why is it that they make such strong case that Jesus was actually physically, personally present to them after his death, And they, of course, didn't have an answer for that. Dale Allison, in his book on the resurrection, tries to take it up point by point. And by the way, he discusses my book in his book on the resurrection. So, but with Brother David, he said there's got to be some kind of, human factor here that is maybe extraordinary, but not unreasonable. And then his buddy in Switzerland, Vanja Palmers, who's a Zen teacher, heard from a Tibetan immigrant friend of his who was a doctor that someone had died, a monk had died in eastern Tibet in 1998, and within a week of his death, his body had completely disappeared. Okay. and that there were these miraculous signs that appeared. So Brother David said to me, well, you know Tibetan, you've studied Tibetan, you have your doctorate and you've matured as a priest and because I'm his disciple. So I would like to entrust you with doing research on that. And so with help from Vajra Palmers and other people, we put together an expedition in 2000, and I went to Eastern Tibet with a friend of mine who was a more skilled translator, and with several other people, and we did interview the eyewitnesses to the death and miraculous events after the death of Khenpo Acha, who was this wonderful, saintly, good, and very wise monk who passed away in 1998, in the summer of 1998. We went there in the summer of 2000, only 2 years later. And so the memories were very fresh, and it was a very rich experience. And the book, Rainbow Body and Resurrection, gives the account of that expedition of research with other reflections, because it took me a long time to assimilate all this, because it really is quite extraordinary and difficult to explain. How do you, well, if you even want to explain something, what's the scientific basis? What's the psychological basis? What's the spiritual basis? What's the meaning? And of course, when we were there, we met wonderful people who had been his disciples, and they were all, not just very devout and very good Buddhists, but they had a warmth and a humanity that was very persuasive. And there were other things that happened that were profoundly persuasive, that what we were dealing with was a reality, a spiritual reality. So go on from there.
Wow.
How do you even begin to explain that? And what were some of the signs, Father, from the 1988 or 98 experience? So it was a week, the body was gone, and what else? Were there other signs?
Yeah, when he passed away, his face changed. Okay,
Oh,
he breathed his last. He was saying the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, which is the
oh,
mantra of the Bodhisattva of compassion. He
oh.
passed away, no longer breathing. His skin became like that of a child, very smooth and soft and pink. He was an 82-year-old man. It was very quick that this change took place. But also around his hermitage, he lived in a wooden cabin just outside this village in Eastern Tibet. There were rainbows of different shapes, some of them
Wow.
vertical or circular or whatever, and they appeared, and they kept emanating from the cabin. Right. Then after a few days, there was even a kind of an explosion of light in the sky that was seen from over 100 kilometers away, and people knew something was going on.
Ah.
The young disciples went to visit his Dharma brother in the village of Chungtai, about 100 kilometers away, and he advised them to continue their prayers and to cover the body with Khenpo Acha's monastic robe, all right, the cloak that he wore. And that's what they did. And he said, don't remove the cloak, all right, just, continue your prayers for at least a week. And they could see under the cloak, because he's lying there, right, under this cloak, that
Yes.
the body was diminishing, all right,
Wow.
day after day after day, little, getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but they didn't give way to temptation to remove the cloth or try to take a photo or anything like that. They were very respectful of the rules, and so there was also a beautiful perfume. So there was no decay. On the contrary, there's a beautiful perfume. And they even heard wordless music
Oh,
around the cabin. There was this music that was, so somebody said, if anybody around here had a tape deck or something like that, they would have thought that they were playing music. But
yes.
nobody had such a device. And this was just miraculous music. And so things like that. And then after 8 days, it was the day to offer prayers for the monthly commemoration of Padmasambhava, and so they removed the cloth at that time, and there was nothing there, nothing at all. And
Wow.
so, it was really pretty amazing. And they, people did report that there was one disciple who was in retreat at this time and who said he received a visit from the Kenpo, while he was in his cave meditating. The Kenpo, after death, went and visited him to encourage him a little bit. And there were a couple of other episodes of that kind. All right, so but His Holiness the Dalai Lama also got word of this event. He had already been in touch with the Kenpo earlier, and he said, this is really remarkable achievement of real spiritual attainment. He said, the Kenpo will not reincarnate. It was very interesting. His Holiness made it quite clear that there would be no, reincarnation lineage coming
Huh.
from this particular master, but that he was going to be operating on a completely different dimension
Yeah.
Wow.
to help people.
Wow.
All
So
his
he,
life, been, very compassionate, very kind, very good, and very humble. And he managed to survive, the communist invasion and all of the civil war that went on. He managed to survive. He continued visiting people, taking care of them, taking care of animals, reconciling people who were fighting with each other, but his way would go beyond the sphere of this world. It's kind
wow.
Wow.
So he really graduated. I mean,
of, he graduated.
he really graduated. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Love that.
I wonder what grade he graduated to. That's
I don't think there are numbers for that, right?
You see, the fascinating thing about this whole adventure, it really was an adventure, was that when we first got to the town of Kanze, where his monastery was, his home monastery was, I actually had no idea where to go. All right. I
oh
mean, we had met with several people and gotten some advice, but and I knew how to get to the village, which was out really in a remote area. But once I got to the monastery, I really didn't know what to do. And just strangely enough, I went up this road through the village to get to what I thought was a gate to this monastery. This is a big sprawling complex. All right. And my companions are telling me, Francis, where are you going? And because it looked to them like we were going to the wrong entryway. And I said, I don't know where I'm going, but we're going there. And we got there, and someone's waiting for us. It was this young man, a Kampa layman, all right, who says, just follow me, as if he knew already what was going on. All right. And follow me. We go upstairs and meet several of the elderly monks who were friends of the Kenpo, and they gave us 8 chapters of the biography of this very holy man and shared with us for several hours, their reminiscences about him. So it's as if it was all planned. And then shortly thereafter, we met another monk who was a close disciple. He took us to visit the nuns across the river, and the nuns had the 9th chapter. Okay. And then we read the 9th chapter with the nuns, and we all burst into tears because it's so intense, and then with that monk who was their chaplain, we went off to the village the next day to interview people right in the village and explore the place where all this happened. All right. And when we came back to Kanza after all of that, there was a huge rainbow from horizon to horizon over the whole city, as if to say, you see?
yeah.
Goodness. Oh my goodness. I have so many questions. So this is a little bit off track, but what is that experience of when you undeniably um, come in contact with evidence of God and God's work that it moves you to tears? What is that makes that happen?
the trigger, right? The inner trigger. Yeah, I think it's when our heart becomes tender and we, are not just thinking with our left brain, but we're allowing body and mind to find a center, find a common place,
Mm,
and
mm,
we experience that. And I back in 1997, I had done another expedition to the region of Dolpo, which is in northern Nepal, near the Annapurna and Dhaulagiri mountains. This is up at 4,200 meters. And one of the tasks that we set was to tape the songs of Milarepa as sung by the lamas of that particular village called Tarap Do village. And we did. And while we're taping it and listening to this beautiful chanting, my guide, who was a Tibetan elderly gentleman, he really burst into tears, just
mm.
hearing those stories, you know.
Yes.
I'll tell you a beautiful consequence of that is that was 1997. Only a few months ago, the grandson of that Lama who did the singing wrote to me and said, they call me the Jesus Lama. All right, you're the
Wow.
Jesus. Everyone knows that the Jesus Lama has tapes of my grandfather. And he said, we've not learned from my grandfather how to sing those songs, but you have the tapes. Can you send us a copy? And so I
Oh,
had a digitalized copy made and sent all of these tapes, more than 8 of them, of songs and stories and oral
mm.
history. And they were very, very grateful, really profoundly
Oh,
grateful.
such
Because
precious,
yeah.
such precious gift. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
I'll never forget those tears of my good friend,
Yeah,
Tsering, who, well, I visited 2 summers ago, by the way. Still alive, a
Oh,
very elderly, gentle soul, and
yeah.
yeah, so
That's beautiful.
great to keep our connections when we
yeah,
can.
yeah.
I have one more question that's a little off track, then we can get back on.
Okay.
How did everything that you have experienced with the study that you've done and the rainbow body and this person's body not being there and the signs and the rainbows and the miracles, how has that changed your experience or your relationship with God as you know God, before you did that study? Did it change it? Did you learn God in a different way? Or I'm having a hard time finding the right words to ask the question, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, another thing, of course, without being too explicit about very personal things, but really, ever since I was a child, I, had experiences of God in prayer, and I mean, certainly not a perfect little boy, but certainly did have these experiences and felt myself persuaded, by certain experiences that I should continue
Mm,
with prayer and study. And to tell you the truth, as a teenager, I became very interested in science, especially biology and genetics. But those studies seemed only to enhance the quality of my prayer. Like take, for
mm,
example, when I was working in this wonderful laboratory, all right, and I had to feed a radioactive fluid into these string bean plants, okay, because we were
Mhm.
studying where this radioactive stuff went in the cells.
mm,
But I suddenly clicked on the idea that maybe this was an analogy to what God does on the intimate level, the cellular level, right, to enhance life, to give life, to support life. And I had experiences like that rather often. And of course, that kind of experience tells you, so God isn't out there, God is much closer,
yes.
to everything. All right. So that was very important. But going back to the rainbow body, there's an episode that I tell about in the book where I interviewed the Dharma brother of Kenpo Acha, whose name is Lama A Kyung, which means the letter A in the form of a Garuda bird, the great power bird of
Yes.
symbol of Vishnu, among other things, that is very significant in South Asian iconography. So I interviewed him. He was a pretty amazing guy and really had a nice connection with him. Several weeks later, all right, I was continuing my research and I was having kind of a bad day, shall we say, thanks to the obtuseness of one of my fellow explorers, shall we say.
Mm.
All right, a very, very brilliant scholar. I won't mention his name. But anyway, he was not paying attention to some needs that I had, spiritual needs. All right. And instead of getting like furiously angry and starting, getting really mad and saying bad words and stuff like that, I was trying to be very good. All right. So what was really interesting was that it was like, in the subtle body, you have that central channel, right, with the chakras and all of that. So I felt that anger went up to the top of my head, all right, and kind of exploded. Okay, it exploded. I didn't say anything, I didn't do anything, but I felt inside me this explosion. And to answer your question, it helped me to understand a lot of things that, and I bet many of our listeners have the same problem. Why do good people do bad things? Right? Not just
Yeah.
why do bad things happen to good people? Why
Right.
do good people do bad things? Why do maybe, priests or bishops or nuns or lamas even, whatever, do some pretty bad stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that explosion had this effect on me of liberating me from the need, right, to condemn, the need, but also the need to believe in, all right, the kind of not just psychological, but even spiritual
Mm.
uh, dependence syndrome, you might say,
Mm.
exploded, which gave me a lot of freedom to deal with issues that I've had to deal with since then, in the past 25 years. Many, many difficulties, but that explosion really carried me through. And I'll tell you, after that explosion happened, for I would say the rest of August and well into September of the year 2000, I was floating. I was in a wonderful state, kind of, I like to call it a non-dual state of consciousness, all right?
Wow.
Because I felt that I had moved into a flow, that and would enable me and did enable me to handle many of the useless attachments that I had built up over the years. So
Mhm.
that's a very good question that you asked, because it really, that
Yeah.
that expedition really helped me a lot.
Wow. So was that like the another version of the explosion of hope?
Maybe.
So
Yep.
so beautiful. It's so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Because
Thank you for that.
it doesn't mean that you jettison, the
Yeah.
institution, or you jettison the tradition. No, but you learn to work with it in a freer and more flowing way. All right. And also work outside it when you have to. Okay. So that also helps
Mhm.
in my interreligious work to understand, to put myself in the place of the people I'm talking to, you know?
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful.
You
Beautiful.
mentioned that someone may have been in two different places at the same time. I have no
Mm.
problem with that because there are other people that is on the record and provable that they were observed in two different places. And Baba Ji from India is one of them. He was observed being on camera in one function, and somewhere else they had taken pictures of him in another part of the country
Yeah. Yeah.
where the time was exactly the same time. So, yes, that actually happens. And you have experience. This is phenomenal.
Yeah, that of course, the case of Saint Pio of Pietrelcina
Hmm.
was on more than one occasion recorded as being in different places. Like there he is in his monastery in on the Gargano Peninsula, in Puglia, here in Italy. But there he was in England, I think in Argentina. He appeared to one of the popes. He would go to different places whenever needed.
Yeah, yeah.
Pretty amazing. And apparently, this disciple that they've just a woman disciple of his who lived in Rome, she's just been given the go ahead to be beatified, and she too was capable of bilocation.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It's just amazing.
I got another question. Some of these things that you have talked about is very attractive for many people to be able to do or aspire for. What kind of practice would you advise people to do, maybe through meditation or other things? What would you suggest people should do to raise their bodily vibration to the point where something like this is possible?
Boy, is that the question? That's the
Yeah,
$64,000 question, isn't it?
yeah.
How do all right. Now, in the case of our Kenpo Acho, he was an interesting person because he had studied with both the Nyingma school and the Gelugpa school of Tibetan Buddhism. And some people even criticized him for that, but because there was always a certain amount of tension between these two orders, especially in the part of Tibet where he grew up in Eastern Tibet. But he was determined to be an ecumenist and bring peace and harmony. And so he personally took teachings in Lhasa from the great Gelugpa masters and also from the great Nyingma teachers. All right. So he had that great philosophical training and intense yoga and liturgical training as well. Okay. So one of the things that he practiced was Vajrakilaya. And Vajrakilaya is a wrathful form of the tantric form of the Buddha, with three heads, and then there's the spike, all right, that forms the body of the deity. And that spike is a very archaic symbol representing the conquest of evil, the conquest of darkness, the conquest of the forces of negativity. And but it can also be very liberating. And it's a powerful, powerful practice. And he was given a special empowerment, right, by I think it was Dujam Rinpoche, the great Nyingma master, to do that practice and become one of the lineage holders of our time. All right, so but he also balanced it with the practice of the Buddha Bodhisattva of compassion, of the Avalokiteshvara. So you have the wrathful action and the peaceful action in his life stream. Okay. Now, for our purposes, I will tell you that, all right, so I'm trained in my tradition, the liturgy of the hours, the mass, the sacraments, and all of that, the rosary, and making pilgrimages, and so on and so forth. I think that kind of grounding is very helpful. And then as we develop, of course, other things open up. We read the mystics. In my case, I've also studied Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam and so forth. So that also nurtures not only our knowledge, but also intensifies our practice, let's face it. But one of the most beautiful things which took place after the expedition and even after the book was published, I attended a 9-day, in fact, I was invited to attend this 9-day retreat in Mustang in northern Nepal. And this was going to be with the Bonpos. And the Bonpos, are the non-Buddhist, but very similar to the Buddhist tradition in Tibet. And there are many teachers in that region of Nepal who are from that lineage, from the Bonpo lineage. And so I was invited to this retreat, and I was going to practice for 9 days with a small group of mostly Americans who were supporting a school and a temple project in that area. And I got to know the local head of the school, Geshe Sonam Gurung, who is fantastic. I mean, a really, really great man, only at the time, about 48. And we did these practices. And among the practices, some of them I knew already, because I had been translating texts from Tibetan about meditation and ritual. But the most important was the heat yoga. And that's what I've been really wanting to get to. All right. Because if you can find a teacher who can teach you the correct way to do the heat yoga, which is based on breath control, right? Really strong breath control. All right. You will begin to move the energies in your body, the so-called winds, all right, or prana, into the central channel. All right. And then you can also begin to experience some of the beautiful effects of that happening. Okay. And so during that retreat, although I already knew this and I already done some practices and had some experiences, but the retreat really helped me to understand how important heat yoga practice is, not only for the heat, which is great in a cold environment, but also for the light that emerges in your consciousness when you do it. Okay. And the fact that it burns away a lot of the same attachments and, conceptual thinking, opinions that I had experienced after my meeting with the Lama Akyung experience, right? The explosion. Right. But the heat yoga does it gradually and liberates your consciousness of a lot of junk, a lot of clutter.
There's a
Right?
lot there too for many of us.
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
So I've
Yeah.
been teaching people how to do that too. And you see how people do grow through the heat yoga onto a wider kind of, you might say, heat and light that extends as compassion throughout the world. All right. Because you don't stay with that. You move on from there. But it is a key, it's a turning point. It is a turning point.
That
Where
is
do you where do you suggest we could go to find heat yoga, where we could either read about it or connect with someone here in the United States, or anywhere, I guess.
It's well known in, for example, both the Bonpo and the Buddhist traditions, and so like someone like Tenzin, what is his name? Tenzin Namgyal, the Bonpo teacher out in California. He will teach this. He will give retreats on this, and there are several other good teachers who will explain how to do it and will guide you through a retreat experience. Dr. Nida Chinangsak, the fellow who has the what is it called? Oh, it's like a little healing center just outside of Los Angeles. All right, so he will do it, Dr. Nida. And then the Kaju teachers, also have this very strong from Milarepa, they have this tradition. So you can do that. Here in Europe, we have several centers as well. But yeah, it has become more widely available thanks to especially the fact that the Bunpo teachers have taught it quite openly to even to beginning students and not just advanced students.
Wow.
Mm.
Wow.
And
Beautiful.
then
I'd love to
we
learn
heard of
more
Wim
about that.
Hof, right? Wim Hof.
Yeah, I
The
was just thinking about him. That's so funny.
Wim Hof basically is doing a hyperventilation and breath control exercise that has similar effects.
Yeah.
So
Oh, okay.
something somewhat similar to that. Yeah,
Mm.
it's pretty physical. It's
Yeah.
pretty.
I love him.
Yeah,
Love him.
Russell
yeah.
Brand came to Italy a couple of years ago, and we had an event in Tuscany, and he did Wim Hof method on one of the evening events at that meeting. It was pretty cool. Yeah, we were sitting out there on the grass doing our heat yoga.
So-
But the full-fledged thing is even more enriching, when you take it step by step and
yeah.
go through, the whole thing, and including, because you have to work with your body, with your muscles, you have to work with your breath control, you have to do visualization, and so on and so forth. So I teach it step by step. Now we'll do this. Now we'll do that. Okay, let's give it a try with this, and so you build up to developing the skill, and then you repeat it many, many times. And
Oh,
ideally you're supposed to do like a 3-month retreat on this practice. to
Wow.
master. Yeah, yeah.
I know we have mentioned the word God here many times, and uh, when I grew up as a little kid, I was told it was the really, really old white guy sitting in the clouds up there somewhere, long white beard and hair and stuff. No, but what is your concept of God? Oh, that's a
Yeah.
tough one.
A big one.
I would say, like I was saying before about the string bean plants, there I
Oh,
was 15 or 16 years old taking care of this greenhouse full of string bean plants, right? And had that experience of God uh, as a luminous presence who was feeding all of our cells, with life. So that was very important for me. I think also, you see, I mean, in Catholicism, we have many different spiritual activities. You go to Mass, you receive Holy Communion. There's scriptures. There are all these theology books. This is my theology section over here, right? So you can overload with concepts and images, right? But also, I found something quite interesting around the same time when I was about 15 or 16 years old. I would go, to the school library during my study hall. This is a public school in Eastchester, New York, and they had the Great Book series. And so I would read some of those, and I read St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in the English translation in the Great Book series. And I discovered that you could read St. Thomas Aquinas, who is very, he presents different arguments. He shows how this argument is wrong and that argument is right. And he comes to his conclusion, and then he goes on to something else. And as he builds his case in a very systematic way. And it sounds very left brain, doesn't it? But if you actually sit there and read it with an open mind, and you try to connect with the mind of the saint who's writing this, in the 13th century, something very interesting happens. Your mind goes beyond the concept. All right. It's almost as if that's a launch pad. And then this encounter with God, who is beyond concepts and images, was beyond the notion of concepts, all right, makes presence, all right, happen. Okay.
Mm.
And that happened to me many times as I'm reading this. And later on, I found a book by Sarah Harding, I think her name is, a British nun who worked in India for many years and learned Sanskrit, translated Sanskrit texts. And she said, we were told by our teacher in England that reading the Summa Theologiae would carry you forward in contemplation. So her teacher must have had the same experience, that working through the concepts and with an open mind and a sense of connectedness blew away, all right, the concepts once again, and you ended up in the presence of God. And I think that maybe that's how St. Thomas Aquinas himself became a saint, right? He was doing that as he would work through the arguments. It wasn't that he was getting stuck on them, he was opening out through them. Okay. And
Mm.
I think that's the secret.
I like the opening out through them. Yeah, that's a visual for me. That's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah.
If you know
Wow.
the book, The Cloud of Unknowing, you'll see a very simple and practical way to do that too. And he doesn't even use concepts at all. He says you have to drop the concepts. All right. But he's well aware of all of because he had studied with all those. This is a guy writing in the 14th century. So he knew very well what was written in the 13th century. He wanted to go as quickly as possible to the contemplative encounter with God and allow God to do the work, all right, and not
Mm.
us. All right,
Exactly.
so show me more of that. Now, that's a very, very wonderful book,
Mhm.
Cloud of Unknowing. Yeah.
Say that
And that
again.
The Cloud of Unknowing.
I
This
like that.
that helped me a lot when I was an undergraduate. I used to take that out into the woods with me and read it.
I have to
Yeah.
write that down. Excuse me.
Sure.
Yeah, and the Dalai Lama said that God is love.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
in a way, that's because the thoughts drop away, but the love doesn't, you see.
Mm.
Right? That's
yeah.
where the tears come too.
Mm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh.
Boy, oh boy. I This got really deep, and I see we are only down to like 7 or 8 minutes left here. But what do you think when you can talk to the whole world and the world is listening? What was the most important thing that you think they should know?
It was very much related to what we were just saying. And when you said God is love, when there was a Tibetan teacher back in many years ago in Kathmandu when I was visiting with a friend of mine who was a Buddhist monk. And this was an uncle of his. And so we went to visit him and said, my uncle is very great teacher. And I said, oh, I can't wait to meet him. And it's the only time that I wore a full-length black cassock in Kathmandu. So I'm walking through Kathmandu with my friend in his Buddhist robes, and I'm wearing this Catholic robe. We went to visit, I remember his name was Sheriff, I think Sheriff Gautsen. And so he asked me the same question, you know, and my reply at the time was, I look forward to the day when every moment of my life will disclose itself, reveal itself as the love of God.
Ah.
Okay. Moment to moment, a disclosure, a revelation of the love of God. And what he said immediately, without a moment's hesitation, I think so too.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Aw.
think,
Oh,
Mhm.
goodness. That's beautiful.
and
Yeah.
just told me that in Thailand, he gave a paper on Buddhist Christian philosophy. And after that paper, a Buddhist monk came up to him and said, now I think I know what you mean when you say God. Before I didn't, you know,
Aw.
Really? Yeah.
and I think it makes sense to me existentially. All right. So there's a lot of amazing convergence that many people, you know, they'll say, "Oh, that's impossible," but in fact, it is possible.
Yeah.
It
Exactly.
is.
Exactly. That is beautiful. I was going to ask another question, but I don't think I even want to dilute what you just said, Father. It's so beautiful, so perfect, and really um, so timely, right now
Yeah.
in this experience that we are in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the future. Let you go several hundred years back, religions were distinctively separated. What do you see in the future? Do you think that most religions can live under the same roof?
Yeah, well, of course, that's been a major theme of my life. All right. So really
Yeah.
trying to do just that. Not only build bridges, but really to share in depth. And in the book on the rainbow body and resurrection, I tell the story of how that happened back in the 8th century, along the Silk Road and in China and in some other parts of Asia, when the Christians coming from the Middle East went into those areas and actually engaged in some pretty amazing dialogues with Buddhists and Taoists and others. So it was possible and it still is possible. Now, for our times, of course, there's been a lot of polarization and a lot of hatred and anger over so many issues, right? So we really have to find a way to, well, first of all, take seriously when there's a disagreement and try to find our way through. You know, we have to build, in that case, it's not just a question of living together, it's a question of building bridges of where we do agree so that we can find a way to overcome where we disagree. All right. You can't
Yeah.
just say, you're wrong, I'm right, you're bad, I'm good. That's not going to work. and misuse of power is not going to get there either.
Mhm.
So there's that. But then you see, there's a whole other area that has to be explored, and that is what's the real purpose of being a human being anyway? All right. And that's why I also think the rainbow body research is so important, because it tells us that you are light. It also tells you that there's a way to realize that light, to make it happen, to make it real, and a way that making it real extends a loving hand to the whole world. Okay,
Mm.
so that's really important. And we have a real problem today with a lot of young people. Were sort of battered by the COVID experience. Let's face it, the school problem, not going to school, not going to church, their parents living in
Yeah.
fear, a lot of tension, and that had a terrible impact on a lot of our young people, young adults, but also children. And so we've got to find a way to reach out to them and let them know that there is a way,
Yeah.
that the way is humane, it's good, it's open, it's available, it's not hidden away someplace, and it doesn't involve hating anybody. Okay, does not
That's right.
involve hate. Right.
Yeah.
So we can offer that to people. And we have here we have some I discovered last night. I knew some of these things, but when you talk to a lawyer or a police officer or emergency room people, you find out the really bad stuff that's going on. You're
Yeah.
aware that this is not just somebody's opinion about somebody being immoral. This is a question about people whose lives are really in danger,
Yeah.
right, because of the confusion and misunderstandings about what it means to be emancipated. Emancipated from what? Very
Yeah.
often it's emancipated from your inner self.
From
So we have to
biases.
find, yeah, help
Yeah.
people find themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see now we're down to just about the end here, but please let people know where they can find your books or how they can connect with you, maybe through email or Facebook or whatever you select.
Sure. It's really very nice of you to do that. The two books about Tibetan studies, Rainbow Body and Resurrection and Liberation in One Lifetime, are available on Amazon, and they come from North Atlantic Books in Berkeley, California. Okay, but you can find them, online. A lot of my talks are on YouTube just by going to Francis V. Tiso on Google, and you'll find a whole lot of interesting stuff. And then I'm on Facebook as Francis Tiso. All right, so no father or canon or doctor or anything, just Francis Tiso, and you can find me there. I had a website for a while, and I found that I was spending a lot of money and getting no hits.
Yeah.
So I kind of, bells and whistles were missing on that website because it was very beautiful. But in any case, I gave up on the website because Facebook is fine. It works pretty
Yeah,
well.
I saw that website years ago when we talked, and you had pictures
Mm.
of a grown man's body that has shrunk down to about that long and with neck not much left except hairs and nails. So yes, that is stuff real.
Yeah, that some of that material is on the website called Rainbow Body, that is sponsored by the Nyingma
Oh,
Tibetan
okay.
community. All right, so yeah, you can, and one of the photos that I myself saw in Tibet is on that website. Yeah,
Oh, wonderful.
where the Lama is radiating rays of light in the dark from his body.
Okay.
Pretty cool.
All right. Well, we gotta go, but thank you very much for being with us.
Glad to
Thank
be
you
here.
so much. Thank you so much,
Blessing.
Father Tisa.
Okay.
Such a blessing. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us for this beautiful conversation. And I hope Father Tisa will come back a little sooner than 3 years. Let's do this again, Father. Augie, thank you so much. And we'll see you again next week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Much
Thank
love.
you.
you